Today we are going to start a new unit which is about something called trigonometry. So, trigonometry in its beginning is something that we're going to talk about happening inside of right triangles. So, we are going to start by drawing a right triangle. A right triangle is a triangle that has one right angle in it, and right angle is a 90-degree angle there. And then we're going to label our corners. I'll call them A, B, and C. We typically call the right angle C, but it doesn't have to be. It's just kind of usually we call that right angle the C angle, and the other ones are A and B. And then what we're going to do is we're going to need to choose one angle that will be our focus angle. So for this first labeling, I'm going to put it down here in the A corner. That symbol, the O with the line in it, is a Greek letter called theta. We usually use Greek letters to label our angles there. So that's just called theta. It's like an O with a line in it. And that just means that that angle is going to be the one that we are going to use as our focus. Then we're going to label the three sides of the triangle according to the relationship with that theta angle. So the first side I'm going to label is called the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse of a right triangle is always across from the right angle. So the hypotenuse is the C side, the one that's across from the C angle. So that hypotenuse is across from the C angle. Then after that, I'm going to label what's called the opposite. The opposite is opposite of our focus angle. So there's our opposite. And then the third side is called the adjacent side. Adjacent is just a fancy word that means next to. So I am next to my bikes. If we were in school, the classroom would be adjacent to Mr. Bell's classroom. So adjacent just means next to. So this is the side that is next to the focus angle. Now the hypotenuse is also right next to it, but the hypotenuse already has a really important job. So that's why I label the hypotenuse first, and then the adjacent is the other next to it side. Okay? So the hypotenuse is across from the right angle, opposite across from the angle we have chosen to focus on, and then adjacent right next to it. I should also say, you are never allowed to focus on the right angle. So that C angle, it already has a really important job. We cannot place our focus there. So we can either use the A or the B angle, but never the right angle. Okay? So then, once we have this set up, there are three trig ratios that we're going to talk about today. The first one is called sine. It's actually spelled S-I-N-E. If you look on a calculator, it just says S-I-N. It's actually a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when students call it the sin button because it's not sinful. It means sine. It's just an abbreviation, just like on a calendar, J-U-N might be June. We don't call it Jun, right? So it's the sine function, but we do abbreviate it, S-I-N. So the sine, then you always put an angle after the trig function. So a really common mistake that I see students do is they just write sine and then they don't put any number or angle after it. That would be like doing a square root symbol without a number inside of it. Like if I said, hey, could you please evaluate that for me? It's a square root with no number in it. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a symbol without a number. That's what it's like if you do a sine without putting an angle inside of it. Okay, so we're going to have sine of an angle. It is defined as being the opposite over the hypotenuse. It's a fraction of two sides of the triangle, the side that is opposite of that angle and the hypotenuse side. Our second trig function we're going to talk about today is called the cosine. Its abbreviation is COS. Again, we call it cosine though, not just cos. And that, again, we apply to an angle. And the cosine is defined as being the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And then the third one is called the tangent. Its abbreviation is tan, T-A-N. Again, we apply that to an angle. Tangent is the opposite over the adjacent side. Okay, so those are the three trig functions that we're going to talk about today, sine, cosine, and tangent. Now it's really important that we remember which two sides to put into those fractions. So as a little memory trick that math teachers have used forever, we use what's called SOHCAHTOA. So that stands for sine, so it names the trig function, okay, that's sine. Sine uses OH, opposite over hypotenuse. And then cosine uses AH, adjacent over hypotenuse. And then T is for tangent, and tangent uses OA, opposite over adjacent. So SOHCAHTOA. Now it's all in the spelling of that, so SOHCAHTOA is a really great memory trick if you can spell it, but if you cannot spell SOHCAHTOA, then it's of no use to you, because if you have accidental silent H's in there, you're missing H's, it's going to mess everything up, right? So SOHCAHTOA is one memory trick. Another one that my teacher used for those who struggled to spell it was she would write out SOHCAHTOA, but then underneath she would also write Oscar had a heap of apples. And that helps you spell it. If we take the first letters of each of those words, O-H, O-H, A-H, A-H, O-A, O-A. So it helps fill in the spelling of SOHCAHTOA. You can make up your own sentence too. If you don't like Oscar had a heap of apples, come up with your own sentence that uses those letters as well. Get creative with it, whatever helps. But you need to learn those three trig functions and which sides we use inside of those fractions. Okay, so let's look at an example now. I'm going to erase this triangle, but I'm going to leave up the rest of the notes so that we can refer back to those. And look at a problem that's going to be like what you'll see in your homework. So in your homework, you're going to have a right triangle. All the sides are going to be labeled with numbers. If they weren't all labeled with numbers, as long as we had two numbers, we could use the Pythagorean theorem. Remember, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and we could find the missing side if we needed to. But in your homework, they're all going to be labeled in there. So we'll have our 3, our 4, and our 5 there. It will already have chosen for you a focus angle, and it will use the Greek letters, either alpha, it looks like a little fish, but that's the Greek letter A, or beta, it actually looks like a B, and I'll use that in the next example so you can see what that looks like. But where they have that labeled, that's going to be our focus angle. And then it's going to ask you to find one specific trig function. It'll choose whether it wants you to do sine, cosine, or tangent for a problem. So let's say for this first problem, it asks you to find sine of alpha. Okay, so this is what your homework's going to look like. So what we want to do is start by labeling the triangle according to the relationship with that alpha label. So first thing is the hypotenuse. I always label the hypotenuse first. Go straight across from that right angle, that's the hypotenuse. Then go straight across from the alpha, that's our opposite. And right next to it, that's the adjacent, or the neighbor. Okay, so start by labeling the three sides of the triangle according to whichever angle it told us to focus on, which in this case was A, or alpha. Now, in this problem, we're using sine. So then we want to remember SOHCAHTOA, Oscar had a heap of apples, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So what we're going to want to put in this blank is a fraction of the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. So the opposite side is the 4, and the hypotenuse side is 5. And that's it. That's all it wants us to type into the box is that fraction. Don't turn it into a decimal. Just leave it as the fraction. Type in the fraction 4 over 5. Okay. Let's do one more on this triangle. Let's say that it wanted us to find the tangent of alpha. Okay, well, tangent of alpha, SOHCAHTOA, OA is opposite over adjacent. Tangent uses the opposite over the adjacent. So we already had the whole triangle labeled. So the opposite side is 4 and the adjacent side is 3. Okay? And that's a top-heavy fraction or an improper fraction. The top is bigger than the bottom. Don't turn it into 1 1/3. Don't turn it into a decimal. Leave it just 4/3. That's what we're looking for. Tangents, as well as sines and cosines. These trig functions, they are called trig ratios, and a ratio is a fraction, just one fraction, and that's what we want. Okay? Let's do one other example, looking at another triangle. All right, so this one's kind of slanted on its side, but that's okay. It's still a right triangle, and that's what matters. So, and in this one, we are going to focus on the beta angle. So we're going to focus on the B angle. So first thing we want to do is label the three sides of the triangle according to the relationship with that beta angle or B angle. I always start by labeling my hypotenuse first. So across from C, I'm going to call that my hypotenuse, that 13. Then across from B is my opposite. And then the one that's right next to it is its neighbor, or we call that the adjacent. All right. And then let's say on this one, it's going to ask us to find the cosine of beta. So ka toa ka CAH. What it wants us to find then is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the adjacent in this one is the 12, and the hypotenuse is the 13. So we just type into the box 12 over 13, and we have found the cosine of the angle. Okay, so this is your introduction to our three trig ratios, sine, cosine, and tangent in right triangles. Ask me whatever questions you have. I am happy to help, and I am here to help. Talk to you guys soon.